Motion by Graff, second by Darcy. Any questions? All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We are out of risk management. That brings us down to the consent agenda. And items 13, 14, and 23 will automatically be pulled. Greg, number 1. Anything else?
What was it, 14? What was the second one?
13 and 14 are always pulled just for new hires, and then 23 because it just came out of committee, and then number 1. So 1, 13, 14, and 23. Can we get a motion for the remainder? Motion by Crawford, second by Wolf. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Can I get a motion for the reappointment of Tom Bressler? Motion by Prale, second by Joesting. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Appointments passed. Okay, back to our agenda. Item 1, can I get a motion to get this on the floor? Motion by Hovey, second by Holford. Greg, you pulled this?
Yes, as far as I'm finding out, this is a relocation of a auction site that's was up by Tremont, and it's kind of the auction of last use. Nobody wants the stuff. I mean, so it ends up there just in case somebody wants to get parts or something like that. It looked kind of like a graveyard to me, but it was kind of a site there in Tremont. I think Tremont's glad it's moving. I'm not so glad it's moving closer to me, but out there. But I guess I'm weary of it being a junkyard, or that it's kept upright and it doesn't, or things put into this that would. Is this just a zoning change, or is just a permit, or is it a permit to allow this place to be run properly? So I guess I want some details on how this is put together.
Crystal, can you fill in some of the blanks there?
It is just a zoning change. Their intent is to operate an auction house at this location. And I understand Ray's concerns, but we do have particular ordinances that can address outside storage or other items that there might be concerns regarding. But there are other businesses that probably be more intense that would even go there with the C2 zoning that we're proposing.
So this isn't like a farmer that can put all his junk old equipment and it sits there for 30 years.
A farmer can do so because
I know they can. I know, I see some of those farms around,
yes.
but this is not like that.
Correct, it's an auction house, so they'll have an actual business there.
Okay, Tim?
Greg, that location that was in Tremont, was that in the city limits or was it in the county?
I think the city's went out. I don't. It's right where Jax is at. I'm not sure if the city's at. I believe the city annexed that, Carol. Okay.
So my question would be, at that time, the county didn't have authority over that property, but as Crystal said, we will now. Hopefully, those ordinances that are in place will prevent lack of attention or causing it to be a graveyard. But if I recall, it looked like that one actually sat in the city limits.
And it does, currently they are located in the village of Fremont.
Any other questions on this? All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
So noted. Motion passes. Item HR 1918, replacement hire. Can we get a motion? Motion by Wolf, second by Newhouser. We bring replacement hires to the full board just routinely. Any questions on this? All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? And item 14, HR 1920. Can I get a motion to get this? Motion by Shortino, second by Sundell. Any questions on this one? Amy, this is under your purview? Okay. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. And then finally, risk management number 23. Can I get a motion to get that on the floor? Motion by Meld, second by Wolf. This just came out of committee tonight. Any further questions? All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. All right, fun part. We're down to unfinished business. I believe we have something on the table. We probably need a motion to take it off the table first. Motion by Grass, second by Crawford, to take whatever it was we placed on the table last week. So the floor is open, and Mike, do you want to say anything before we start?
Well, I guess just to make sure that everybody's clear, I think what's currently on the table right now is actually a report from the committee recommending, from executive committee, recommending disapproval or recommending to not approve the clerk's proposal on re-precincting. That's a little bit different. It's unusual compared to how we normally operate as a board. Normally, everything that's on the agenda that we consider has been approved out of committee. There's a technicality in the board rules. I guess maybe not a technicality, it's in the board rules, that really what is on the agenda is anything that's reported out of committee. So it doesn't necessarily have to be approved out of committee to be considered. So when committees address items, they can come before the board as a report to approve or disapprove. In this case, the report would have come to disapprove, and that's currently what's on the agenda and what is being addressed right now. I don't know if that clarifies anything for anyone. It's a little bit of a different procedure than I think what we're used to. Normally, you wouldn't see anything on the agenda that hasn't been approved by committee, but technically in the board rules, anything that is reported out of committee comes before the board, whether it's to a positive or a negative vote.
Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that Mr. Hawley is correct, and I don't think that I can move the acceptance of the minority report, but I think that there has been a minority report prepared, and the first step, I believe, and I've consulted with Mr. Hawley, I'm the parliamentarian for this body, but I wanted to make sure the State's Attorney's Office agrees with this. The first step would be if there is an individual presenting the minority report, and I believe that Mr. Graff and others have signed their names to that, there would be a question whether anyone objects to the acceptance of that report. That's a non-debatable issue to be addressed if there is an objection raised. So I think the first step would be if those members who have signed their names to the minority report want to move for that to be accepted in place of the majority report, and then there would be an issue of whether there is any objection to that. I believe there would be further procedures after that, but I think that is the first step.
Is to get a motion and a second to accept the minority report, which would replace what came out of committee, and then that would need a majority of the board to proceed ahead.
Right.
I think the first procedure, I guess, would be is what Mr. Atkins mentioned, if there's any objection to, I guess, considering the minority report.
Even before we get a motion and a second?
You need the motion and the second before you can.
Right.
I think we need the motion and second by those who have signed off on the minority report. I don't think anyone else can move and second that particular issue.
Is there anyone, I guess, any board members that are not clear on what a minority report is, since this isn't a procedure that we normally use? Essentially what it is just a report of the minority regarding what their vote was and the reasons why from the committee. There can be multiple minority reports, there can be one minority report. If there's 4 people in the minority from the committee vote, and each one of them wants to bring forth a minority report under the right circumstances, they can do that. And it's, like I said, just a report of what the minority's position is and what their votes are and why.
So again, procedurally, if we have a first and a second, and it passes, then we've accepted the precinct maps. Or is there more business after that? Okay. Is there a first and a second?
I have a point of order.
Yes.
We have a motion on the floor and a second to bring this off the table. Don't we have to bring it off the table first?
All right, so we have a first and a second.
I'd like to comment on that before we vote on that motion.
On the
whether to bring it off the table or not. I'd like to comment.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
My comment on this is, I'm a firm believer in our committee system. However, there are certain topics that I think need to be addressed by the full board. I believe this is one of those topics that needs to be addressed by the full board, and it needs to be brought off the table in order to do that. This was a 5 to 6 vote. It was a very close vote, and it's something that needs the attention of the entire board because it has the potential to affect us long term.
Tim?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I concur with Mr. Graff. I was in support of the minority report simply because I felt that it was a large enough issue that I would have preferred 21 opinions versus 7 or 8, which is what we had. The second thing is I was uncomfortable with the facts at the time. It's just one of these topics where you just knew that there was more to the story. And I think over the last 10 days, there have been more facts bubble up that I think people need to know before they finally vote, whether they voted up or down. And I think it's only fair to know those facts before you make an educated decision and a vote. So that was the reason I was behind it, not whether I'm going to support it or not, but the fact that everybody just needed to know everything on both sides, how it's going to affect us one way or the other before we make a decision of that magnitude.
Sure. Any other comments or questions before we bring it off the table? Is there a motion to bring it off the table?
You got that.
Oh, yeah, excuse me. All those in favor of bringing it off the table signify by aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, it's off the table now.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion to accept the minority report.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the minority report, second by Sin. Discussion.
This is a procedural oddity.
Yes.
Point of order with regards to this. I don't think that the motion and second gets voted on unless there is an objection to the minority report. We can go ahead and accept the report because the report itself, accepting it, does not require action. The next step is where action will be required. So at this point, if there is no one objecting, and Mr. Hawley, please correct me if I'm wrong, if there's no one objecting to accepting the report as simply a report from the minority, then we move on to the next step where potentially there will be action taken, and that would require a vote.
Russ, did you have a comment?
Back on mic. So my question is, the next step is another motion and second?
The next step would require a motion and second, and that next step would be to have the action contemplated by the minority report voted up or down. It would be moving for the resolution that the minority report is in favor of to be passed by the full board.
It would be a vote to substitute the minority report for the committee report.
That's probably a better way to phrase it.
And the last question for the parliamentarian is there a restriction on who can make the motion and second like there was before, or it's open?
As far as I could find in Robert's rules, and this is a relatively small section of Robert's rules, there is no such limitation once the minority report has been accepted. At that point, it is a report to the full board, and it is the board taking action on the minority report. So anyone can move or second, I believe, at this point.
So, Mr. Chairman, my motion would be to accept the minority report and implement the actions therein.
Is there a second? Second by Paul. Okay, so now it's on the table.
Just to be clear, is that a motion to substitute the minority report for,
You can add that language.
substitute the minority report for the committee report?
Yes, sir.
Bill?
Yeah. And will there be a point of discussion on?
No.
I think we're at that point now, yes. So, the floor is
In
open.
regards, discussion in regards to what?
I think just broadly,
Broad,
we can
okay.
talk about.
I think at this point, what the motion is to substitute the minority report for the committee report. The committee report currently is recommending disapproval of the re-precincting. This would substitute the minority report if the vote is in the affirmative to substitute the minority report, then what would be on the floor for further vote would be a vote on approving re-precincting. So there would still be 2 votes.
Okay.
Right now, the discussion would just be on whether you want to substitute that minority report for the committee report to be considered by the full board ultimately.
Yeah, Nick?
My question is also procedural. Does that, at one point we needed to substitute a resolution. Is that what this motion is doing?
It would, yeah. The resolution would be consistent with the minority report, but then if that substitution is voted on and the vote is in the affirmative, there would still be the ultimate passage of that resolution to take place.
Okay, so the floor is open for discussion, questions, debate on whether to replace the existing with the minority report. Greg?
I agree with what Nick and Tim said about everybody having the right to this, and I think this allows this to happen. It scares me a little bit, I think like it does, I think the chairman, and it's opened up Pandora's box maybe a little bit about what our future votes could end up being like if we lose on a committee or some things like that. And maybe our board rules should be tailored a little easier, a little better to allow some form or something that's a little more directed to allow this. So I'm a little nervous about going this way because we haven't so long, but I think it is, I agree with Nick and Tim, it is important to let the body vote on this.
I think, just a little off topic, we would need to change our board rules to not what was reported out of committee, but what was actually affirmatively reported out of committee. Bill?
Addressing that particular issue, I think that if the board wanted to change the board rules, I believe that simply changing one word where it says reported, if we change that to approved or passed out of committee, that would take care of whether or not we could have minority reports in the future. I'm not saying whether or not we should, but if there is a concern about minority reports, it's easily taken care of. But this is something that, as Mr. Crawford pointed out to us, it's been part of our rules since 1977. We've done it now a second time, so I don't think that we're exactly opening floodgates.
So that's probably a topic for another day in changing our rules. So go back to what we're talking about tonight. So the floor is open. Russ?
So I'm going to switch gears because I was going to talk about the process, but because Mike, here's why we're sort of walking on a tight line. I think the parliamentarian and I both thought that hearing no objection took care of the second bite of the apple, and then we'd go automatically to the third bite, which was what I thought my motion was, to not only substitute but then implement the recommendation. But what you're saying is that's going to have to follow this in another motion. So I'm not going to fight that battle. I'm just going to make one last comment about the process then, since that's where we're at. And that is that, like Bill just said, been around a long time, and I've seen it used, the minority report used twice since the 70s. So it's not like you said, it's not a floodgate, and I think I would be comfortable if we didn't change any of the words in the rules. But if you did change them, I'd go along with it. So I'm looking forward to voting on this and then actually making a motion that I thought I made before to implement the language.
Floor is open. So my biggest hurdle, I want to save money. I really do. I want to see these. But when our attorney says that we don't have any authority under state statute to consolidate, I'm not sure how we as a board can make that decision. I mean, what else are we going to do that we don't have authority? And I'm not sure where we draw that line. So, Bill, I'm sure you have.
What I would propose is that we first address the procedural issue. I would like to discuss this at much more length than what any of you probably would. But I'd like to first address the procedural issue, and then I will gladly get into the reasons why I think that Mr. Holly's opinion, although that's probably what I would give if I were in his seat, is just not an opinion that I agree with.
Okay, back to the procedure, I guess. So, yeah, Nick?
Well, my only concern, Mr. Chairman, is this doesn't die right here. I think everybody's not making their arguments now to get it on the floor so we can fully discuss this, but if it dies here and people haven't made arguments, I'm trying to decide when do you want us to make the arguments? So do we want to get it on the floor and then make the arguments, or do we want to make the arguments now? I'm asking procedurally.
Bill, let's do that. Bill?
If no one will object to me talking about the substance when we're still on a procedural issue, I would be happy to make my comments at this point.
Well, I think people are reluctant. Let's just go ahead and we're going to do a roll call to make the replacement. So if you vote yes, the minority report is what we're going to be voting on next. If you vote no, and the majority votes no, then it dies right now. So, John?
Atkins?
Yes.
Connick?
Yes.
Crawford?
Yes.
Darcy?
No.
Graff?
Yes.
Hall?
Yes.
Harris? Holford?
Yes.
Hovey?
Yes.
Emig?
No.
Jostin?
Yes.
Longfellow?
Yes.
Mennel?
Yes.
Minton?
Yes.
Newhouser?
Yes.
Frail?
Yes.
Scortino?
Yes.
Sin?
Yes.
Sundell?
No.
Wolf?
Yes.
Motion passes. So now the minority report is what is on the floor now. And that's what we'll vote on next. So now we're to the open issue. Russ?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, it's very important to thank the people who've done some really heavy lifting on this topic, and it wasn't me. I had strong opinions, but I didn't do any of the work. Nick and the parliamentarian, and actually you yourself, and the county clerk, and amongst others, have done a lot of work here. So my thanks to all of them. All along, my goal was real simple, and that is that I wanted to, it was my understanding that what we'd done most years, and what a lot of other counties had done in this space, was able to save some money and run our elections in an efficient, traditional manner, and without exacerbating issues like trying to get even more election judges when we already have a problem getting election judges. And I think, Mr. Chairman, and I heard you suggest that in the executive committee too, that you liked not having to spend a lot of money. The problem was, and it was only one in my view, that it seemed that the state law was contrary, the language in the state law was contrary to what we had been doing and other counties have been doing for quite a while. And that's problematic. And so my recommendation was to get...
And just,
Yeah.
so Tazewell County's not done this. We've not consolidated precincts, to my knowledge, ever. I'm not sure which other counties locally that have done this either that you're referring to. So,
Well, it's not doing it, I guess, is what
okay.
I meant.
Mike wants to go ahead, Mike.
Just so that all of you are clear, I guess, on what my opinion and my advice to the board is, and the difference between consolidation of precincts and division of precincts and what the statutes that apply are. Since our last meeting, I had some time to, I guess, ask some more questions and look into what the actual proposal is a little bit more. And what I determined is what's being done is this re-precincting is actually consolidating precincts. And there's a distinction, there's a difference under the law between division of precincts or changing boundaries of precincts and actually consolidating precincts. I don't want to overwhelm anybody with legalese, so I'll try to make it as quick and clear as possible. But what the election code allows is, it allows the division of precincts in two situations where there's more than 600 registered voters in a precinct. It allows division. It requires division where there's more than 800 actual voters. There is no authority under the election code to consolidate precincts. As I'm sure we've probably discussed in other matters, counties are only provided with the powers that are permitted by state statute. If there's no power in state statute for a county board to act, they're not authorized to act. There was actually an appellate court case, Town of Naples versus County of Scott, that addressed the consolidation of precincts by a county board, and the majority in that court case determined that there's no authority under law to consolidate precincts. The reasoning, and again, I'll try and keep this clear and quick. Section 11.1 of the election code provides the power for county boards to re-precinct and change boundaries of precincts. What the court found was that 11.2 limits the authority of county boards to do those changes and re-precinct. And 11.2 is the section that limits it to the particular situations where the registered voters are over 600 or actual voters are over 800. There is no authorization for consolidating precincts, and the court recognized that. They indicate that because it's not specifically authorized by statute that there's no authority to consolidate. And of course, the court, this was a case in 1982, they did recognize in the opinion that that would be difficult for county boards, that it might not be convenient, but that if it was a problem, that the state legislature could act to give that authority to county boards. Since 1982, the state legislature has never acted to give that authority to county boards despite this opinion. And that would indicate to me that there is no intent to provide that authority, and the authority does not exist to consolidate precincts. That's sort of the short version of it, but my advice tonight would be that the county board is not authorized to approve this consolidation of precincts. And I guess approval of it would be beyond your statutory authority.
I'll defer to Mr.
Randy. Thank you. I want to get to a couple of things that you talked about. I happen to have a copy of the opinion. You were nice enough to let me know ahead of time of this opinion existing. And I've discussed this with you a little bit. I want part of our discussion to be available for the entire board. You would acknowledge that, and I apologize if I sound like I'm cross-examining you, it's just habit. You would acknowledge that in this particular case, that the complaint that was brought forward included a provision in the complaint that there were no precincts of over 600 registered voters, and so therefore the particular re-precincting case that came before the appellate court involved a situation where there was no authority under any statute. They didn't need to decide it under a you can't consolidate kind of theory. I mean, that is your understanding of the facts as well, correct?
That is a portion of the facts. I believe when the complaint was made, the complaint was based in part on the fact that state law was violated when it consolidated precincts.
And I think it did rely on both of those, but clearly the facts in that case are different than what we have here, because we do have precincts that have over 600 registered voters in Tazewell County. And so we do have authority to re-precinct under the statute 11.2, I believe it is. There is authority to re-precinct.
Right, there would be authority to re-precinct under 11.2 in precincts that have, again, over 600 registered voters or 800 actual voters. But the authority under the statute would be limited to that.
And the concurrence pointed out that in the controlling Supreme Court case, Stroud, I believe it is, that when the issue of consolidation was raised, that the Supreme Court, rather than saying that counties don't have the authority to consolidate, they instead said, answering a contention that the failure to enlarge the precinct was improper, which would involve consolidation, the Supreme Court stated that absent evidence that the board was arbitrary or unreasonable in failing to do so, no impropriety was shown. And as the concurrence says, had the Supreme Court thought the board lacked power to consolidate a portion of another precinct with that precinct, it would have so stated. So I believe that we have a situation where the highest court in Illinois, in addressing this, has refused to find that there is a lack of authority for consolidation, but an appellate court, in a situation where they didn't need to, have stated that they believe there's no authority for consolidation. So it is my contention that the majority opinion is merely dicta. And dicta is just a legal term used when you want to say that what a judge said doesn't matter, it's just words, which is the Latin for just words. So I am urging my fellow board members to follow the Illinois Supreme Court rather than the Illinois Appellate Court. Now, as I said, I do not want anyone to think that I am making an attack on Mr. Holly or on his work. If I were sitting in his chair, I would take the conservative view that he's taking. There is a court that has spoken on this, and they have said that this is beyond our authority. But I believe that the Supreme Court statements are the actual controlling statements, and I believe that we should follow what the Supreme Court, although it was through refusing to address it, not through an affirmative statement, I still think we should follow what the Supreme Court's reasoning allows, which is, so long as we are not arbitrary or unreasonable, that we can consolidate. Further, I would point out that under the proposed plan, as I understand it, and I'm sure that Mr. Ackerman can clear up any factual issues better than I can, but as I understand it, this proposed plan will allow us to eliminate one ADA non-compliant polling place. And it is my preference that if we're going to be sued, that we be sued over whether or not we have the authority to re-precinct, not whether or not we're denying the right to vote to individuals who are disabled. And so for that reason, and for the reasons I've already given, I urge all of my fellow board members to vote in favor of the revisions of the precincts. The phrase re-precincting just does not roll off the tongue. So I'm urging all of you to vote in favor of revising the precincts as proposed by the county clerk and the minority report from the executive committee.
Brandon?
Can I respond to that just real quickly? Since I know this is only a discussion that lawyers could love, but I want to make it clear, I guess, that I understand Mr. Atkins' argument regarding the Supreme Court, but what he's talking about there is a Supreme Court case where it's an absence of discussing the issue of consolidation. There isn't Supreme Court guidance to actually follow on this particular issue. The only guidance we have on the particular issue of consolidation is this appellate court case. And the majority opinion did address this and provided as part of its reasoning for upholding the complaint that was filed in the case, that it was a valid argument. The concurrence, I'm sure Mr. Atkins would agree, a lot of times when there are issues that a court doesn't address, if a Supreme Court does not address an issue of consolidation for some reason or doesn't mention it, it doesn't mean that the appellate court decision isn't valid. It doesn't call into question anything. Courts decide issues all the time for particular issues, or they fail to address certain issues for all kinds of different reasons. Sometimes it's simply that they don't need to address the issue in order to decide a particular dispute. So a lot of times there's no good explanation for why an issue is not addressed. It's just speculation. So the best guidance we have on these statutes is the appellate court opinion. That opinion again was in 1982. Since that time, this issue has had, there's been many years where this issue could have been brought to the Supreme Court for some reason if it had come up again. The Supreme Court hasn't addressed it specifically on this topic of consolidation. And again, the legislature hasn't acted either.
Now you can talk, Brandon.
Excellent, thank you. I hope it's worth the wait. So, as far as the General Assembly goes, Mr. Holly, 1982 was when this statute was created. Yes? Opinion. I'm sorry.
Appellate court opinion was from 1982.
I'm sorry. You had said something about statutory law versus common law. And in the statute, supposedly counties do not have the authority to consolidate or re-precinct. Is that correct?
It's not it's not specifically addressed in the statutes, no. And that's sort of the court's reasoning and my reasoning as well. The counties are limited to only the powers that are given to them in statutes. And if the power is not specifically in the statute, then the county doesn't have the authority to act.
Well, in the universe that these statutes are supreme, I feel like there's maybe been some preparation work that maybe could have been done that was not done. You know, a few meetings ago I discussed SB 1007, and that was spearheaded by our county clerk. You know, our county clerk, he's doing a good job with the strategic plan. He's ticking off a lot of boxes. But maybe it's time to take this proposed map, and instead of voting about it tonight, take it to the General Assembly and asking, does this work? Can we do this? Because I am concerned about the potential of lawsuits, whether they be from the State Board of Elections or whether it be ADA. I feel like we're opening up a very big floodgate, Pandora's box, whatever you want to call it. And, you know, as a non-lawyer, I feel like I'm caught in a cyclone right now. So I would really love some clarity on this issue. Thank you.
The legislature did have a bill this year to increase the size of, you could have precincts up to 1,200, I believe it was. And they chose not to address it. It died in committee. Any other comments? Let me start. Nancy, Sue, and then Mindy.
Well, I think Mr. Graff has done a lot of research on this as well, and I have a message that I think he sent to everyone about a discussion he had with the Board of Elections chair, and I'm thinking that might be worth sharing. Is that something that you would think would be worth sharing?
It's not the chair, it's a staff attorney with the
okay.
State Board of Elections.
All right, I'm sorry, wrong title. But
go ahead.
I think he might be able to explain it better than I, and I think that's something that sort of hits on a little different tack here, but that I think is important as we're discussing this. So I push the floor. I relinquish the floor to Mr. Graff.
Do you want to speak to this, or do you want to be like Robert Mueller and says the report's Because I don't want to put you on the spot. I mean,
I'll wait my turn, or I'll do it now. It's up to you.
You mind if Nick addresses that? Okay, go ahead, Nick.
Because I was going to ask for permission to speak. We're in a situation here where we're doing this solely to try to save money. We've been in budget crisis for a number of years, and we've asked all our employees, all our department heads, all our elected to try to save money. And Mr. Ackerman came with us with a plan to attempt to reduce our precincts by 20%, reducing 130 election judges, saving those funds. He came up with a plan, whether we call it consolidation, whether we call it remapping, it sounds to me like we're talking semantics. With a law that was passed in the late 40s at a time when Illinois was growing, not shrinking, and at a time when early voting did not exist. So we're at a point in time where we still have a situation in Illinois where politics is supreme, and the key player in political gamesmanship is the precinct committee person. And it's no surprise to me that we will not pass a law in Illinois that reduces the possibility of the number of precincts in our state. We have a difference of opinion between two lawyers. And we have a potential violation of federal law with a non-compliant precinct, ADA non-compliant. I would rather be on, when lawyers disagree, we go to court. I would rather be proactive and do what I think is right for Tazewell County by reducing our costs that all the taxpayers pay and have a court tell us, no, you can't do that, than be on the other side where somebody in a wheelchair can't get to a polling location. I'd rather defend the first one than the last one. We started off a month ago talking about the number of voters in a precinct. That's how this all began, and it became moot because the Board of Elections said, we don't care. I had conversations with a staff attorney, his name's in the report. He said it's common across the state for precincts to exceed 1,100, 1,200 voters, and the state Board of Elections doesn't care. His words were, to quote him, it's super normal in all parts of the state. So it doesn't surprise me that this is out there. I understand what following the law means. Obviously, I spent 30 plus years enforcing the laws of our state. But this is a situation where the laws are in conflict. The laws are outdated. They haven't been addressed to deal with what we're facing today. I think Tazewell County needs to be a leader in this and start the process to reduce our costs and eliminate some of the waste that we have in government. The proposal drops us from 135 to 109 precincts. In 82 of those precincts, voters will see no difference. It's the same. Now, some of the areas where we change will reduce election judges. The town I grew up in has 2 precincts right now. It will go to 1 precinct if this is approved. They can save 5 election judges for a turnout of probably 500 voters for the whole precinct. So this really is a no-brainer in my opinion. If someone challenges us and if the court says we can't do it, then we'll fix it when we can fix it. But I think we need to proceed down that path. If Mrs. Prale, have I addressed what you wanted to say? Thank you.
Sue?
I have a question about the projected voter turnout in this minority report. It said based on prior voter turnout, you're making projections. What election or elections are you basing this projection on?
The state law, the guidance is that we use the last general election, which would have been the midterm elections. That was the election that we're to base all of the numbers off of. That gets replaced in the next election with the next, which would be the presidential with that one. So those are the numbers that those numbers are referencing.
Seems to me that it would make more sense to look at the presidential election because that typically has a much higher voter turnout. You know, you're projecting that all of these voters are going to be well within the time or the numbers of what they're supposed to have. But, you know, when it comes to a presidential election, that's generally when we have more people voting.
Well, it's not votes placed, it is registered voters. So that count is already there, it's already established. It's not whether or not they came out to vote, but as of that election date, how many registered voters were in that precinct. That's the number that's used. So that number changes every day constantly. We're doing a purge right now of our system of that's authorized by law of ones that have been inactive for a long period of time, so they'll be washed out. But I think you would see that swing between the presidential and the midterm election, there isn't a swing there because again, it's registered, total number of registered voters in our system, not voters that actually went and voted.
But you're projecting what the voter turnout's
No,
going to
we're
be.
using the numbers that are solid.
It says right here, projected
You-
voter
you
turnout
get-
would be
John,
less
you
than
gave me-
725.
You projected, using the last 3 general elections, you gave me a spreadsheet projecting that. I don't know if you've forgotten that or not, but you also looked at the 2016 election and the 2014 election. You shared those numbers with me, and there wasn't a big shift between 14, 16, and 18.
And that's why I'm saying there was no projection. Those were actual numbers that were used. So there was no guessing on a number or anything like that. We were using factual numbers, no projection on my part at all, other than taking precincts that, a couple, 3 precincts that we actually divided, estimating the amount that was coming off of those precincts. Again, using general numbers, but saying that's roughly 25% of that precinct that is being moved from one to the other. That's the only place where there was any type of conjecture. But again, the numbers themselves are all based off of registered voters as of that election.
So I thought the conversation last time was actual voters. I remember that conversation. And there was talk about early voting and everything else. So, I mean, the more we talk about this, the more I get confused. So, Mindy?
So I have a few questions, sorry, loud. I have a few questions. First, I do want to say, I mean, I think obviously logically we all want to save money. I clearly would support that. And I think that, you know, some good work and thought has been done. That's my hang up on it, is just I don't feel comfortable picking and choosing what laws or what I feel like the law is trying to say. I don't feel comfortable me deciding what ones I feel like we should follow, which ones we should not. So that is my hang up. I do have questions, like just making sure I understand it. So we have some smaller precincts that by consolidating, that means we put them together. That's what that means? So we took smaller precincts and they are combined, because it seems like there's a big deal between we cannot consolidate, but we can like divide or redraw lines. So I'm just trying to make sure that that I understand that by consolidating, that particular word is something we're not supposed to do. We don't have the authority to do. So we're taking smaller precincts and putting them together. Is that right?
Yes and no. We took smaller ones, we did put them together. I disagree where I don't think that that's allowed. I think that if you took a look across the state and listened to what the State Board of Elections prescribed, this is what is commonplace done. We've got a precinct in Pekin that has 200. We have another one that has 400. We put them together to make 600. They both go to the same precinct, to the location, so there's no changing of that polling location in that example. But rather than 10 election judges, we're using 5 there. So yes, we're putting 2 precincts together to get to a new total.
And I do appreciate that, and I think that makes sense. I just think, I'm not sure that just because I can say, oh, that's logical, if that's what I feel like you're saying, kind of precedent has been set that we're not allowed to do that. So that's, I mean, I think I can agree with it in theory, but I can also not be certain that that's the right thing to do because I'm not sure we have the authority to do it. And then a question, like if somebody sued us over this, would this be putting us financially at risk, or would this be like a slap on the wrist and go fix it?
It depends on what the circumstances of the lawsuit might be. It could be as simple as going to court and having a judge order that the re-precincting be completely redone. In theory, it could put election results in a position where they're more challengeable. It would be a fact-specific situation. And again, my best legal advice to the board is not to put yourselves in a situation where we're evaluating what's going to happen when we get sued, or if we violate this law, is there a consequence? My advice is, if there is a law, that it's followed. And we expect that of our citizens. I think government has a higher responsibility to ensure that if there are laws, we're following them. And we're not evaluating whether there's a consequence for violating that law.
Okay. Yeah, because I just wasn't sure, based on conversation, if this could potentially, so you're saying it could potentially lead to like a fine or money involved, depending on what type of lawsuit got brought to us, potentially.
I would say anything is possible, just because I don't know what the facts or circumstances of a possible lawsuit would be. I guess, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Regarding the advice of the State Board of Elections attorney, I appreciate that he can give that advice. However, keep in mind, it's very easy to give legal advice to someone that you don't represent. If you're not going to be called on to defend that person in a court case, if you're not going to be responsible for representing that person, legal advice is easy to give. It's a lot more difficult when you're the one who would be defending the action in court.
Lastly, I kind of feel like the ADA non-compliant polling place seems like a separate issue that should be fixed, because why can we not do that? To me, I feel like that should be a priority.
We have a couple issues with that. This is the time, this meeting, for you to set precinct and polling locations. They are only to be changed, polling locations, if a disaster hits, fire, tornado, etc., and the polling location is not available, or if the board did not know of something in advance and decided and didn't know that a circumstance exists. You know that a circumstance exists. I'll also point out, because it's been brought up, this changes polling locations. So while some discussion has been about, and I supplied this information to Mr. Graff when he asked about it, are we moving polling locations away? There are an overwhelming majority that are being changed, that are moving closer. I supplied him with that information that showed we have polling precincts right now that are not in compliance because they're not located within the precinct. An example would be North Parkway Assembly right out here in Pekin. The people that live right across the street, all around that church, even though we have it as 4 or 5 polling locations right now, they don't vote there. They're required to go all the way to the north side of Pekin to Lake Whitehurst to vote there. So this was provided in that information, was moving all of these locations so that they met the law by being as close to the precinct or within as possible. So no, I couldn't figure out how, I don't see how you could justify afterwards saying that you didn't know about it in advance, or that some disaster struck where we can't use that as a polling location.
How many do we have that fall under that?
I didn't bring that information. I apologize. I didn't know that was going to be coming up. I supplied it by email. North Parkway Assembly, Morton Precinct 3, Morton Precinct, there's a bunch of them, Morton, that are all being moved so that they're within their precincts. Washington, there was several of them there. No, a few of them there, sorry, not several.
And so these are, okay, so I guess I'm a little confused, because I felt like somebody said that we had one precinct that was not wheelchair accessible. Is that what you're talking about? That there's multiple?
Well, no, I was talking about polling location outside the precinct, meaning the people have to
yeah, no, okay, so I was talking
ADA,
about.
we have a couple in the county.
Yeah.
One that we were able to fix in this move. Others that we will look to fix in 2 years when the next time available to us would be, which is 2021.
Why didn't we fix those this time?
We couldn't fix them because we couldn't find a facility within the precinct. We'll look for ones as we go on, but the time didn't allow for us to fix all of the ADA compliance problems. We haven't had any complaints I won't bring up, and we've had those as polling locations for a long time now. So.
I'm sorry, Monica and then Carol.
I guess my thing is here, as she says, hang up. Like Ms. Sundell says, we have an issue of being authorized in the law. Our state's attorney is advising us not to do this. I agree with Mr. Colby over there to where we need to be proactive with this, as Mr. Graff said, that these laws are antiquated, so maybe Tazewell County does need to take the lead and go to the legislature and get some of these things updated. In that respect, then we don't have to worry about someone coming in the back door at us and costing us more money that we're spending, and we're chasing good money after bad. So I don't, at this time, and I do not see why that other situation with the ADA came up, that it wasn't. We spend enough time, or the clerk has, and I do appreciate all the work that has been done to this. I mean, I'm a very frugal individual, and I don't like spending money that I don't really have to. And if this situation continues, I think that we should actually look into getting something done, maybe on the county level with the counties and or the clerks throughout the state, to start addressing these things in your associations and do that. So at this time, I'm just going to say I'm really not in favor, because of only basically of what the state's attorney's office is providing us the information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This recent discussion about the ADA and that, and I think Mr. Ackerman said we have a couple, and I don't know, I just throw this out. I've been to events where they have porta potties that are ADA accessible, and that might be an alternative to bring us in compliance with that. And on the other hand, the consolidation, and I discussed earlier in weeks back with Mr. Ackerman and with the board that I know he's going around, John, you're going around to the townships now, and I thought it would have been a much better idea to do that prior to this, because I've been getting some calls that have arose from, a lot of the public is just finding out, and I know you had some public meetings for information, but a lot of times people don't, they wait until they see what's happening. And some of the concerns I hadn't even thought about before, but I'm going to use the Tremont area as an example. And a lot of you might not be aware, but Tremont is divided right through Tremont by two townships. You have Elm Grove Township on the west side of town, and you have Tremont Township on the east side of town. And I believe one of Elm Grove Township or precincts they actually voted outside their precinct in Tremont, which, I didn't have a problem with that. Then there was two precincts that voted in Tremont, and the third precinct, which this is one of the townships where there is consolidation, Tremont, is out at Allentown. And I've had some calls, some people learned that Lake Windermere, I don't know how many of you are familiar with that subdivision, but it's a quite large subdivision, is straight west of Tremont. And you go out Route 9, and then Windermere Road angles off, and it goes right out into Lake Windermere. And so after I got some calls, why I drove out there, and it's 2.1 miles from Lake Windermere into Tremont, and maybe another quarter of a mile to where they'd be to their polling place. But the new map is going, if I understand you right, John, we'll put Windermere, we'll vote at Allentown. Is Allentown one of the locations that is not ADM accessible?
No, I believe they are.
They are. Okay, so, but when they leave Lake Windermere and they go straight into Tremont, and the overwhelming majority of those people that they work in Peoria, Pekin, or Tremont, and it's a straight shot in there. They said the people that called me, there's very few people that go towards Allentown. But if you go, take Windermere Road straight into Tremont, it's a straight shot, one stop sign. I drove the other route to go to Allentown from Lake Windermere, and it's 4.7 miles. And there are 3 stop signs. There are 6 or 7 corners, 2 curves, and there's several hills that are, Lake Windermere is an upgraded township road, and the roads that they got traveling to Allentown are not upgraded township road. There's some really crowned hills, there's no striped lines, so, you know, that's a little bit off the subject, but it is double the distance that those people would be driving, and then you'll just have one Tremont precinct in there. And when you take the road out of Lake Windermere and you go to Augustine Road, you take that to Schmidgall Road, you take that to Allentown Road, and when they pull out to Allentown, it's right on a hill coming from the west, and you know, I can understand why these people are calling me that you know, they're just now hearing that it's going to be changed. And that's why I go back to my argument that I had. It would have been much better, in my opinion, to go to precinct or the townships prior to making the decisions on what you are proposing. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Everybody knows how to, Nancy?
As I sit here tonight, I've gone this way and I've gone this way, and I'm back and forth, and I don't think I'm the only one. And I have a feeling this is one of those issues that I think Monica pointed out. As good as it looks on one side and as bad as it looks on the other side, maybe we need to put this back on the back burner and do some research and not do it immediately. It may cost us right now, but we've already paid that money last time there was an election. Leave things as they are and go a little more slowly here and work this through, because maybe I'm the only one that feels this way, but I really don't know that I could vote tonight, but I'm not sure I'd be happy with either vote at this point. And so I'm just throwing that out as, I hate to table things because I like to get things done, but I think there's something going on here that we need to work through, and it's going to take maybe 9 months to have that baby, I guess.
Are you making a motion to table? Are you making a motion to table?
I move to table it.
Is there a second?
If it tables, it dies.
Second by Hovey.
If you table it, it dies. So you made a choice. And you've taken that vote away from the full board.
Okay, so you want me to withdraw my motion and do something different here?
Only because we don't have the motion on the floor yet. We still need one more motion and second for that third step to make this happen.
It hasn't happened yet. No, you voted to accept the minority report rather than the group vote, but I don't have that. When we started the redistricting work. Unless you're going back to that original motion, is that what you're doing?
Done, Nancy?
I'm not done.
Okay.
I don't want this to die. That's not really my point here. I'm not trying to kill the whole project. I think there's merit in this project, and I think we need to do something, and I think John's on the line here with a lot of ideas and positive actions that could really make a difference and save us some money. I just don't think that I, as a voter in this board, am ready to make that decision. So if you want me to withdraw my motion to table, I will do that.
For right now, okay?
Okay.
Brandon?
I will withdraw that.
I want to agree with Member Prail. You know, we are not killing anything tonight. We're just putting something in storage until we're ready to get this done. I'm all about saving money. I ran as a conservative. I clip coupons at home. But to be blunt, the death here, that's something a member said earlier, pure semantics. We're putting something in storage. We're going to see that the job gets done the right way the first time instead of putting taxpayers at risk. Thank you.
Okay. been taken off the table. You're saying we needed 3 votes, right?
Once the minority report was substituted for the committee report, then that became the next item for the board to address, just the same as if it had come out of the committee.
So our first one was to accept the minority report. The second one was to switch them, and now we need one more.
This would be to move to approve, right?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, Russ.
I have a point of order.
Yes.
I made a motion which was to accept or substitute, as Mr. Holly said, the minority report for the recommendation from the committee, and to implement it. And what I considered, and I think most of us did, Mr. Holly's comment was to split out my implement part away from that, and he left it just process on this phase 2, and he wanted a separate phase 3 for the motion. If anybody disagree with that? Okay, so at this point, I would make a motion to do phase 3, which is to implement the minority report. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a first, we have a second by Sin. Back to the first one. And we're not gonna rehash. I think,
Thank God.
do most of us know where we're at? Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have one.
Yes.
It's kind of off subject, but it goes to what we were talking about. This is the very reason why an item shouldn't die in committee. This discussion has been fruitful, however it turns out, I think it was appropriate that it came back as the way it did. It got the full board involved, and I think that it speaks for itself to let us continue down the path we've been doing in the last how many years. We've done it twice. It worked well tonight. Thank you.
Any other comments?
The yes vote is to approve.
So, Greg, you know,
I just wanted to say I'm in favor of this. You know, there's been suggestions about letting Springfield take care of it, and you know how what shape the state's in. The strength of this state is local government, and we have a chance here to do something positive, and it's more than money. I believe it's gonna make the election process better. And so I'm gonna vote for this.
I'm not being sarcastic, but why don't we make it 50 precincts and we'll save a lot more money. The state law is pretty clear, or at least the court case, but I'll accept whatever happens here. So let's call roll call.
Atkins?
Aye.
Conant?
No.
Crawford?
Aye.
Darcy?
No.
Graff?
Yes.
Hall?
Yes.
Harris? Holford?
Yes.
Hovey?
No.
Emick?
No.
Josting?
Yes.
Longfellow?
Yes.
Mennel?
Yes.
Mitten?
Yes.
Newhouser?
Yes.
Trail?
Yes.
Squartino?
No.
Sin?
Yes.
Sundell?
No.
Wolf?
Yes.
All right, motion passes. We'll go with the new precincts.
What was that vote?
13 to
13 to 6. All right, those were sent out this week, so hopefully everybody had a chance to review those. Can I get a motion to approve the August calendar? Motion by Mitten, second by Hall. All those in favor signify by aye. Those opposed? We are recessed until August 28th.